Quality. In my presentation today, I'll share with you some of our policy efforts related to the COVID pandemic, as well as some other recent quality guidance. And then I'll move to share with you some of our priorities for 2021, both in terms of guidance and regulations, as well as some of our priority initiatives. And then we'll save some time for some challenge questions at the end. As you can imagine, 2020 was a very busy year for us as we issued guidance in response to the COVID public health emergency. Our first guidance was issued in April that outlined a temporary policy for repackaging or combining propofol, a drug in extensive use for patients who were on ventilators related to the COVID-19 infection. Then in June, we issued a guidance on good manufacturing practice considerations for manufacturers who might have employees on the manufacturing floor exposed to COVID. Then in August, we provided a guidance on manufacturing, supply chain, and inspections during COVID-19 as a question and answer document. In September, we issued a guidance on resuming manufacturing operations as employees might return to a manufacturing facility. And then finally, in December, we issued a guidance outlining how we would deal with applicant responses to complete response letters when there was an outstanding facility assessment needed during this time. In 2021, we issued a guidance in January on potency assay considerations for developers of monoclonal antibodies. We also issued an update to that manufacturing, supply chain, and inspection guidance. Then in March, we issued a guidance on container closure system and component changes as we wanted to be responsive to needs to make changes to accommodate for interruptions in the normal supply chain for these components. And then most recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we issued a guidance on remote interactive evaluations of both drug manufacturing facilities and bioresearch monitoring sites during COVID. OPQ was also involved with several other COVID-related guidances over the past year and a half, several related to the preparation of alcohol-based hand sanitizer products and the manufacture of alcohol for such products, a policy on the temporary use of certain cryogenic containers for medical gases in need during the public health emergency, another policy on compounding of certain drugs, again to ensure that we maintained access to hospitalized patients. And then as we started to see issues with methanol contamination of hand sanitizer products, we issued a policy on the requirement for testing of alcohol and isopropyl alcohol to ensure that it was not contaminated with methanol before incorporating that into hand sanitizer products. And finally, as we started to see variants of the COVID-19 virus emerge, we issued a guidance on how to make changes to monoclonal antibody products that were targeting COVID to react to those variants. In addition to the guidances we issued related to COVID, we've had a number of ongoing internal efforts to try to address the challenges that we faced given travel restrictions and the potential impact of those travel restrictions on pending applications. This has required the centers to work together, not only CDER and ORA, but also the Center for Biologics and the Center for Veterinary Medicine. And we've worked together to develop standardized communications to applicants and DMF holders, depending on the specifics of their pending application. We've determined how we'll prioritize inspections as travel restrictions are lifted in the future. We've documented when records requests under Section 704A4 of the Act can be used instead of a pre-approval inspection. As you heard, we issued a guidance on review timelines for those responses to CR letters. We developed communications to facilities regarding our assessment of records that we've received under one of those 704A4 requests. And we developed our policy around use of MRA third country inspection reports. So when an MRA partner has conducted an inspection of a facility in a different country, and our use of those inspections to, in certain cases, be in lieu of an FDA inspection. So let me move to a few other recent quality guidances that have posted. Back in July of 2020, we issued 3 guidances, 2 drafts, one on cannabis and cannabis-derived compounds, and one on endotoxin limits during development of investigational oncology drugs. We also issued a final guidance on expiration dating of unit dose repackaged solid oral dosage form. Then in September, we issued the final guidance on control of nitrosamine impurities and a draft guidance on the use of PBPK, or physiologically based pharmacokinetic analysis, for oral drug product development. So moving on now to our priorities for 2021. You'll find on our website in the CDER public guidance agenda a number of quality-related guidances that should be issuing in draft or in revised draft in 2021. The first that I call your attention to are 2 guidances specific to ANDAs and stability testing. The first is an update of the current Q&A guidance on stability testing. The second is a more general guidance that not only applies to ANDAs, it also applies to NDAs and BLAs, covering quality and stability and addressing certain topics that are not clearly addressed in the ICHQ-1 guideline. There's also guidance on inspection of injectable products for visible particulates, on drug products that are given via enteral feeding tube, on microbiological quality considerations for non-sterile drug products, and then our final guidance that will help to establish our program to recognize voluntary consensus standards. We also have several initiatives ongoing related to implementation of new parts of the statute that were added by the CARES Act. The first is a requirement for risk management plans, and the second is a requirement for reporting amounts of listed drugs manufactured for commercial distribution. So let's talk a little bit about risk management plans first. So the CARES Act added Section 506CJ to the Act, and you'll recognize the first part of this is recognizable because of the previously established notification requirement for supply interruptions. So we're talking about drugs that are life-supporting, life-sustaining, intended for use in prevention or treatment of a debilitating disease or condition, also those used in emergency medical care, etc. And now, importantly, including any active pharmaceutical ingredient or associated medical device used for preparation or administration included in the drug. So thinking about these drugs and APIs, those manufacturers now are required to develop, maintain, and implement, as appropriate, a redundancy risk management plan. And this is intended to both identify and evaluate potential risks to the supply of the drug, and this is required for each establishment in which the drug or API is manufactured. FDA is developing a draft guidance on risk management plans to address the provisions in the CARES Act and provide additional recommendations related to the content of such risk management plans. Moving on to the next provision, the CARES Act added a new provision in the Section 510, which is about registration and listing, and it requires each person who registers to provide a report annually to FDA on the amount of each drug that was manufactured, etc., for commercial distribution. It also gave us the authority to require a particular format so that this information could be submitted electronically. This subsection also included a provision that FDA can exempt certain biological products or categories of biological products from this requirement. FDA is also developing a draft guidance on reporting the amount of listed drugs that's in development and is on our public guidance agenda as well. few other quality policy priorities for 2021. You'll find on the unified agenda our proposed rulemaking on post-approval changes to approved applications. Then from an internal perspective, a number of implementation activities ongoing associated with the so-called alternate tools. So when we can't do a physical in-person inspection because of travel restrictions, we've been using alternate tools, including those records requests that I mentioned under 704A4 of the Act, as well as using MRA, partner inspection reports, and now remote interactive evaluations at different facilities. We're also heavily involved in our initiative on quality management maturity, and you'll hear more about that in a few moments from my colleague Jennifer McGuire. And then we continue to be heavily involved in different international harmonization activities, both at ICH and in PICAS. Well, international harmonization is important because it provides opportunities to both industry and regulators to reduce regulatory burden and incentivize continual improvement and innovation. There are two recently finalized ICH guidelines that I'll call your attention to. One, ICH-Q12 on lifecycle management, and ICH-M9 on the BCS class-based bio-waivers. There are also several ICH guidelines under development: ICH-Q13 on continuous manufacturing, a revision to ICH-Q2, and a new guideline, Q14, covering analytical procedure development and validation. And then ICH-Q3E on extractables and leachables. Finally, some relatively new work items: ICH-Q9 on quality risk management, and then a revision to ICH-M4Q, which is on the quality sections of the Common Technical Document. There are other opportunities to contribute to the ICH development process, two of which I'll talk about here today. One is the Quality Discussion Group, or the QDG. This group was endorsed by the ICH Management Committee in June of 2018 and provides input to the Management Committee on recommendations for revision to existing ICH guidelines, on training needs for existing ICH guidelines, and also recommendations regarding new ICH guidelines and the relative order in which they should be taken up by expert working groups. There's also an informal generics discussion group. This group was endorsed in November of 2018 and helps to identify where there are additional opportunities for harmonization on topics specific to generic drugs. Then PICS, or the Pharmaceutical Inspectorate Cooperation Scheme, which includes inspectorates from around the world. I call your attention to one of their more recent documents, which is a draft recommendation paper on how to evaluate for investigators or inspectors, or how to demonstrate from the perspective of a manufacturer the effectiveness of the PQS in relation to risk-based change management. This recommendation is particularly insightful and important as it relates to the ICH Q12 guideline, which is about pharmaceutical product lifecycle management. This guideline was finalized by ICH in November 2019, and the expert working group was then converted to an implementation work group, which has been developing training materials for assessors and inspectors and working with our colleagues at PICS to have materials available for use in all regions of the world. The FDA version of this guideline, which will be final FDA guidance, is awaiting publication, and implementation of the full guideline will begin when that guidance publishes. The scope of Q12 is broad. It includes not only innovators, but also generic and biosimilar products, and CDER and CBER-led drug-device combination products. The Q12 tools can be used for both new products as well as already marketed products. And more details about how ICH Q12 will be implemented in the U.S. will be covered in a draft guidance that is also awaiting publication. Finally, we've been developing a map to provide information and guidance to our internal staff on how to implement the tools outlined in Q12. So now it's time to move on to our challenge question. So the first question is true or false. The new requirement to develop, maintain, and implement as appropriate risk management plans does not apply to any API manufacturers. What do you think? The answer is false. Risk management plans are required for those manufacturers of APIs used in drugs that are life-supporting, life-sustaining, intended for use in those debilitating disease or conditions. So risk management plans are required for certain API manufacturers. Let's move to the second question. Again, true or false? ICH guidelines are relevant to generic drug products. Did you get it right? The answer is true. Yes, not only are ICH guidelines applicable to generic drug products, but the Informal Generics Discussion Group also provides an opportunity to identify new areas for harmonization for generics. So I thank you for your time today and look forward to the panel discussion after the next presentation. Thanks very much.